Commissioner John King, you are running for United States Senate here in Georgia. We appreciate you making the time to talk with us on the Georgia vote here this morning. I think a good place to start is this. Why do you want to be Georgia's next senator?
You know, I've thought about it, I've reflected, I've talked to my family, I've talked to my friends, and I'll tell you, I see this vacuum of leadership in Washington, D.C. And it reminds me of my call to duty when I became an Atlanta police officer. There used to be this recruiting poster with the Atlanta Police Department that said, you can complain about what's wrong in the world or you can do something about it. And I see this vacuum of just, you know, of courage and leadership that is a call. I mean, the fact that Georgia deserves a senator that reflects the values, the interests, that can address the fears that Georgians have. Not a senator that will do what's politically expedient, that will lie to Georgia voters, that saying that the former president was just fine. He's on top of his game. Everybody, a blind man could have seen that President Biden was not at the top of his game. And
you're talking about his age and mental competency?
Everything, yes, everything.
And you have concerns about that?
Absolutely. Everybody had concerns. A blind man would have seen that the man was not fully fit. But Senator Ossoff just flat out lied to Georgians. Continues to show just a lack of leadership. Writing strongly worded letters to the VA to reform the VA. I said, I'm a veteran. I know that people are suffering across, you know, veterans, the lack of just quality care that the VA has delivered for years. And everybody's just been kicking the can down the road. I told Governor Kemp months ago that if he decided not to run, that I was seriously looking at running. I'm a veteran of Afghanistan. My son is also a veteran of Afghanistan. He's a Marine and Army. I was protected by Afghans while I was there. I was assigned to the Ministry of Interior, the largest, 97,000 police officers in Afghanistan at the time. I traveled with Afghans. I was protected by Afghans. I wasn't protected by Americans for quite a long period. They put their life on the line to keep me alive. When Afghanistan was imploding, as a result of just President Biden and the administration wanted to rush out of there, I was getting calls from Afghans saying, "Can you help get me out?" And I called, both Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock, and I said, "I need some help." They wouldn't even respond to my call.
You never got a response?
Never got a response. And that to me broke my heart. The last message that I got from my Afghan partners is, I know you can't get me out, but can you at least try to get my daughters out? As a father of a daughter, that still haunts me. Our word matters. Our word in the world matters. And also, we ought to have senators that question the task and purpose before we deploy American soldiers, for America's sons and daughters to conflict zones around the world. Ought to ask, what is the purpose? What is the criteria for success? Is this worth it? And we've had a serious lack of leadership in the Senate. The fact that Senator Ossoff, took credit for everything that we were doing here in Georgia, with all the EVs and all the investments, it's a cheap shot. The man is not serious about representing the state of Georgia, and I intend to do so.
I want to dwell on a couple of things you said there, but I think a good place to start is this. Early on in your answer, you referenced that old Atlanta Police Department ad that you say really impacted your life and the trajectory of your career. And the ad said something to the effect of, you can either complain about what's wrong or do something about it. When you look at Georgia right now, what is wrong?
The fact that we have positive gains going on in Georgia, but we have no representation in the U.S. Senate. We have 2 senators who are absent without leave, AWOL. John Ossoff might as well be California's 3rd senator because he represents their values. Boys and girls sports, not backing the Atlanta mayor on the building of the Atlanta Police Academy, an academy that I graduated from. that is near and dear to the fact that we need better trained police officers. These two senators just sat by the sideline. But John Ossoff, just the lack of courage to be able to engage, it was just waffling. Atlanta deserves better, Georgia deserves better, and I intend to do so.
You brought up the issue of, as you put it, boys and girls sports. This is the issue of transgender young people participating in girls and women's sports. It's an issue that we saw and heard a lot about, particularly in the 2024 presidential campaign. Then candidate, now President Trump, made that a real focal point of his campaign, particularly in the later months of that election. Is this a big issue in the lives of a lot of Georgians, or is it a wedge issue that has taken on, in your view, more importance than it actually plays in most folks' lived experiences?
I think it's a big deal here in Georgia because no father of a daughter wants her either injured by participating in the sports with somebody that is physically stronger. And I don't want young girls losing out on scholarships and opportunities because they have to compete against a young man. I don't, that's inherently unfair and that's inherently anti-women.
I know that the president of the NCAA, Charlie Baker, recently said that he understands that there are fewer than about 10 trans athletes playing sports at the college level. Is that big of an issue?
Well, look at all the young women that have been denied the opportunity for scholarships, for contracts as a result of that. It is inherently, how many young women have to be harmed before we say that's enough? I think that's, when we see something that's clearly unfair. I mean, if you look at how many trans athletes are, should the rest of society, the rest of all young women suffer as a result of that? To me, it's just an inherent unfair, process. And I think the clarity is easy. It's easy for most Georgians to figure out.
I want to linger here for just a moment longer, just because this is an issue we've seen get a lot of attention in these campaigns, and we're already seeing it in this 2026 campaign too. And then I want to move on to some other brass tacks issues, but I think it's worth closing the loop here. There are going to be those who hear your answer there, and maybe they are a transgender young person. Maybe they're a parent like you are, and maybe as a parent they have a son or a daughter who is transgender. What's your message to those folks who may feel like they're being called out and singled out in this conversation?
I don't think that one wrong justifies. I mean, I feel for a parent that has a kid that's going through gender dysphoria, and I think they should be given the opportunities, but not at the cost of denying a young woman the right to compete. I think there's a place in the center where people can say, hey, one wrong does not justify another. And I just don't think the injuries to young girls, the denying of opportunities, and that's what Title IX is about. It's about getting opportunities for women. If you like to, if you think that you're, that you want to support women, how do you do that and deny them the opportunity to compete?
Let's shift gears here. I want to talk about how you view the state and our relationship to the rest of the country, the state of politics. There's a lot of ground to cover. I think a good place to start is this. From where you sit right now, what do you think is the biggest issue facing Georgia?
The economy. Absolutely the economy. The amount of fraud, waste, and abuse that we have at the national level, that everybody's just been looking the other way. People continue to kick the can down the road and not do anything about it. The fact that, my goodness, in the last days of the Biden administration, but $2 billion went to Stacey Abrams? How is that? Does that even make any sense? And of course, the Trump administration is trying to figure out where this money went to and try to bring it back.
And now, and I hate to interrupt, but just to be super clear here, because people are going to watch this interview in full, you're talking about money that went to groups that were purportedly connected to Stacey Abrams. It wasn't directly to her, correct?
Leaders lead. In the Army, we say everything that happens or fails to happen in a unit is the commander's responsibility. She's either going to be a leader or not a leader. You can't have it both ways.
Talking about the economy, you say that's the biggest concern, the biggest issue facing Georgia. How do you fix it?
Doing a lot of the things that we've been doing in Georgia. Letting people keep money in their pocket as much as we can. Minimizing the size of government. I mean, look at the growth in government since COVID. We were talking about briefly before this interview started. The size and the scope of government has increased tremendously. In Georgia, when the budgets are tight, we can't float debt like the federal government. We have to cut the size of the government. And luckily, we have such an environment in Georgia. There's lots of jobs available, but jobs that you have to show up to work. And so there's a great opportunity. So I think we need to cut the size of the federal government. The fact that the United States military, we have half of our combat soldiers are in the active duty, half of them are in the National Guard Reserves. We have 1 million civilians serving in the Department of Defense, and many of them are unionized. I don't understand how that works when you are, trying to defend this nation and be able to react. It just is not sustainable. Our national debt is a national security issue right now, and I think we need to have a serious discussion about the size and scope of our federal government. The states can do a great deal in support of this. When bureaucracies and governments are closest to the people, we become a lot more reflective and reactive to the realities on the ground. And I think there's room there to let the states innovate a great deal. We've been very successful in Georgia in innovating and bringing common sense. And the key word is common sense.
The job you are running for right now is, of course, an integral component. The United States Senate seat's an integral component in federal lawmaking. One particularly germane topic I think right now that's worth spending a moment on is one of President Trump's legislative priorities, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. It recently very narrowly passed out of the United States House of Representatives and now moves over to the U.S. Senate, which if you win the Republican nomination and then go on to win this seat, that'll be where you are, and you'll have to deal with these kinds of legislative priorities. You mentioned you're concerned about the deficit. This Big Beautiful Bill will cut taxes. It will keep the 2017 Trump-era tax cuts in place, but the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan entity, estimates that this bill, if passed, will increase the federal deficit by trillions of dollars. If you were in the Senate right now, would you vote to pass the Big Beautiful Bill?
I would, absolutely. But I would also vote to cut the fraud, waste, and abuse that has been rampant. I'm very disappointed right now on folks in Washington, D.C. who are representing us, who have not taken any action on all the clearly identified fraud that's been going on. And I think with a combination of the tax cuts, we can't squeeze any more money out of Georgians' pockets. Luckily, Georgia's leadership, Governor Kemp and the leadership in Georgia has been trying to reduce the state taxes, but we can't compete against the federal government when they're trying to increase it. Imagine increasing this. People are already struggling going to groceries. Imagine having to pay for additional taxes if these taxes are not made, because there will be a tax increase. And enough is enough. I think we need to. The federal government needs to do some belt tightening, and is definitely worthy of that.
You're a general. You served in the United States military for a long time, and you spent a lot of time working specifically on logistics. When you look at federal lawmaking and see bills like this, and this is the name of it, the Big Beautiful Bill, when you see bills like that come along that are roughly 1,000 pages long and they have lots of issues crammed into one piece of legislation, is there ever a part of you that looks at that and thinks, boy, it might be more efficient to legislate on one specific issue at a time as opposed to working through these big, massive pieces of legislation, and maybe that would turn out more efficient laws for the country?
There's a number of things that could be done, but you can't, when this bill is at stake, when the rest of President Trump's administration is going to be based on whether, if we can't get the basic done of making these tax cuts permanent, then there's not going to be any energy. You're already seeing the energy, the Green Deal trying to be made. There's so much fat there. It's incredible. I'm still looking we had, we had folks coming to beautiful Doraville, where I was the chief of police, promising all these EV, electric charging vehicles, all this infrastructure. Where is that? I guess it's in the same place that the $2 billion went to all these energy savings magic stoves that Stacey Abrams was trying to buy for down to Sumter County, I guess. There's so much abuse, and these folks do not have a great deal of credibility. I think we need to have a serious look about what the role of the federal government has in balancing out on how effective state governments are. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but trying to become, these senators are trying to pretend that they're also the president. There's not a co-president. Senators are there to pass laws and to really put a lot of scrutiny into this process, and it's worthy of it. But to sit around and just take pot shots on TV just so they can, increase their clicks or their fundraising, at this time we're tired of that. We're tired of the noise.
And I just want to be super clear here, because you mentioned a senator is not a co-president. Do you believe that the legislative branch is a co-equal branch with the executive?
Absolutely, absolutely. But they have not acted in that way. I mean, we can't even get a war powers resolution done. I mean, I've been the result of poor leadership in the Senate. I've been deployed to places in the world that I still question myself. What are we doing here? What is our purpose? What does success look like? And I'm glad that President Trump has the courage to at least try to end the bloodshed. And nobody's looking at that role seriously, of questioning what is the task, what is the purpose, and why we're deploying young men and women around the world without any real clarity.
Are you specifically referencing right now, when you talk about President Trump's efforts to end the bloodshed, are you looking particularly at the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict? Is that what's forward of mind right now?
That is one of those things, but also, Gaza and the conflict in Israel. I mean, we have soldiers deployed all over the world. And
do you think people realize that? Do you think civilians realize that?
They should. I mean, when Vice President Harris was campaigning, saying that we have no soldiers deployed in combat zones, I wish that John Ossoff would have said, wait a second, we have Georgia National Guardsmen in Syria, Iraq, Kuwait, in the border between Israel and Egypt. They're at risk. Their families certainly knew that they were at risk. And so it's just this being out of touch that I think we ought to have somebody, again, focus on who we represent. We represent Georgia. We don't represent the Democratic or Republican parties. Georgia and the citizens and our interests and our focus and our lives has to be the first thing that we focused on.
In order to get to the general election here, you first have to get through a primary. You have at least one challenger on the Republican side right now. It's early. There may be others who get into this race. How do you differentiate yourself from your competition?
Experience. I haven't just sat behind a camera and videoed, documentaries. I've been there. I've been on the border. I was the first, general officer serving on the border in 2017. I was born and raised in Mexico. I understand the challenges of the border and immigration. I've been sent all over the world to carry out the foreign policy of the United States of America. I've been there when my soldiers were being injured, when bringing injured soldiers back home, and how the VA has just really lacked the seriousness to take care. I know the cost of bad foreign policy. Everybody else can talk about it. Everybody else can videotape, or they can make a great message. But I've been there. I was on the streets of Atlanta. I know about homelessness. I know the challenges that it's going to take, and how do we have to support each other to bring a seriousness to solving problems, not just talking about it.
I want to ask you just a couple last questions about some Georgia-specific issues here. We're grateful for your time. You and I have talked a lot about foreign policy, your experience in the armed forces, your experience in law enforcement. We'd be remiss if we did not also talk about your current role, because you have a statewide role right now. You're the insurance commissioner for Georgia, and that role came into some focus this year, Governor Brian Kemp's marquee legislative priority this year was tort reform, his tort reform effort, and you were a supporter of that tort reform effort. It passed narrowly, but it got done and it's been signed into law. Some people have questioned what the impact of this tort reform bill will be, and we got asked this question, so I want to put it to you. Will tort reform lower Georgians' insurance premiums?
A typical politician would say certainly, but I'm not a typical politician. It will stabilize the rates, and I will now hold insurance. I now have an extra tool in the toolkit to hold insurance companies accountable. We've expended so much political capital in getting tort reform done. I've been working on tort reform for 3 years, and it wasn't because insurance. I'm elected by the people of the state of Georgia. I don't work for insurance companies. I've issued the largest fines in Georgia history to insurance companies. I've recovered, over $100 million back to consumers' pockets as a result of our investigations of insurance companies. And so I'm no stranger to holding insurance companies' feet to the fire. And my job is we had to make the case that unfair use of lawsuits were crushing our small businesses. The small businesses in Southeast Atlanta, where I was a police officer, where couldn't afford insurance. And now we have the tools to fight. Now I'm calling on insurance companies to either stabilize or reduce 3 to 5% rates this year. And if they don't, if they come to me with requests for rate increases, we're going to have some hearings. They're going to have to justify to not only to me but to the public why they should get those kind of rates. Because we've expended, without Governor Kemp, this would have been impossible. I've been working on this for 3 years, and I was hitting my head against a brick wall. With the governor's help, we were able to get it done. So I'm very proud to be part of this. But we were always thinking about small businesses and how they were getting crushed by the state of the market. We had insurance companies leaving the state. A young veteran down in South Georgia hit me with this about 3.5 years ago. He served with me in Iraq. He says, Colonel, because that's the last time he remembered me. He said, Colonel, I'm trying to start a trucking company to move logs. I can't afford $17,000 for one truck for insurance. On top of that, I have to pay for the lease of the vehicle. That was my call to action. That young veteran saying, you need to do something. There's a major problem. Insurance companies weren't saying a thing. They were just saying that we're not going to sell coverage or we're going to leave. This young soldier who's trying to start a new business is one that punched me in the chest and says, you need to do something. And that's what drives me. I'm triggered for solving problems, and I don't care who I work with. And the problem has been clear. Now my message to insurance companies, you need to stabilize rates or you need to decrease them to show why all this effort was worthwhile. If you don't, we'll be back at the legislature calling for some additional authorities to hold their feet to the fire.
You mentioned Governor Kemp and the political capital that he spent to get this effort over the line, and it was a successful effort in that it is now Georgia law. I know you've been very close with the governor, a close ally of his. In Georgia, a lot of people, a lot of political strategists, and I think candidly just people who live in the state could pretty easily identify, when you look at the Republican Party in Georgia, there are sort of two big power centers. There is President Donald Trump and there's Governor Brian Kemp. And sometimes they're on the same page. Sometimes, as you know, and anybody who's watching this will know, sometimes they're very much not on the same page. President Trump at times has been very critical of Governor Kemp. When you look at the party, and when you look at yourself as a politician, do you see yourself more as a Trump Republican or a Kemp Republican?
Great question. I really see myself as, I've been incredibly close and supportive of Governor Kemp. I mean, he appointed me and helped me get elected. I mean, I owe a debt to Governor Kemp, forever. And I'll come from that tribe where we honor those. But I also was the co-chair for President Trump's re-election. So I'm one of the few politicians that could actually navigate in both camps.
Is that doable? Can people do that?
Absolutely is doable. You just have to, you can't play games. You got to be truthful. And you got to you stand on certain things, good governance, good foreign policy. There's a place for people to be able to navigate both. And you just got to tell the truth up front. You can't pander to either one, because if you lose the credibility, both will say you're not the right person. And I think both of them appreciate candor, and they appreciate courage, and they appreciate clarity. And I think I can navigate both because I've done it. I've been very successful of being able to work with both, and I will continue doing so.
I want to end here. Your closing message to somebody who might be watching this interview and thinking, boy, 2026 feels like a long way away, but also maybe not, because it feels like campaign season has begun. To a potential voter who's listening to you right now, your pitch to them would be what?
My pitch is, if you're tired of the status quo, if you're tired of, one camp against the other, take a hard look at, I am a product of Georgia. Even though I have the funny accent, Spanish and Southern rolling together. I'm the new generation of people who want to represent our great state, our people, the diversity. I'm very comfortable coming into working inside of Atlanta where I was a beat officer. I started my careers in the high crime foot patrol on Auburn Avenue, walking Coretta Scott King to her car every night. I'm that guy, and I haven't changed. My soldiers that I've had the privilege to serve with all over the world, the debt that I owe to them, I never forget that. I will never forget that. I am, what you see is what you get. You see a soldier, you see a lawman. And I don't forget who I serve.
I think that's a good time to wrap it up. Commissioner John King, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.